So a little bit of a switch for Jay and I. If you didn't know, Jay and I were actually down in Orlando, Florida this week for The Gathering, which that title sounds like an apocalyptic kind of movie, doesn't it? It's like The Gathering. And but it was just a bunch of, it was the international gathering of Wesleyan pastors. It happens every 4 years. And so we were able to go down there and just have a great time of sunshine, warmth, and amazing speakers. I mean, it was just incredible. I wish that we could share the messages with you, the videos and things. I'm wanting to look into it, but I think with some of the speakers, it's like a copyright issue and things like that. But I will say, one of the speakers, Steve Duneff, an amazing Wesleyan pastor. He's at College Church, I believe it is right now. And as he was giving his message, I was just felt God saying, feeling the little tap on the shoulder and going, hey, what you have planned for Sunday, pay attention because you're going to do something else. So what I had planned for today might happen next week. But I just want to share, and it's not what Steve shared, actually. It's just what I felt God leading me to share after hearing his message today. So just give you that little warning that this is going to be a little bit different than what was planned and that sort of thing. But we are in our series, This is the Year, and this does still stay with that. And what we're hitting is we're hitting one of our 5 pathways that we have here at Hillside. If you don't know, we have 5 different pathways that we feel if you were taking next steps in those 5 different areas, that will help you in your spiritual walk and taking that next step in spiritual growth. And the one we're talking about this month is reflection. And actually taking time to reflect on where you are in your spiritual journey. And reflect on who is God and who are you. And just really taking the time, because we as Americans, typically, we're pretty horrible at taking time to simply reflect. Normally, it's, hey, this is fantastic. I have a couple free hours. Do you know what I can accomplish in these 2 free hours? Rather than, do you know what I can do to relax during these 2 free hours, right? We're constantly trying to fill that schedule. And it was even hard for me, right? Part of the reason for this conference was the whole relax aspect as well. They're like, look, pastors, we want you to be able to relax, have some time off, just decompress. And, I found myself even on a time that was scheduled to relax, when it said free time, literally on the schedule, free time, I was like, great. Now I can go back to my room and I can do X and I can do Y and I can do Z and no one's going to bother me. And it's like, But you know what's amazing? When you finally tend to allow yourself to relax, your body tends to go, well, it's about time. And all of a sudden, you might be sitting there just like, I'm doing nothing. I can't believe I'm doing nothing. And once you finally allow yourself to do nothing, what tends to happen to me every now and then is all of a sudden I wake up. I'm like, oh my goodness, I just took a 2-hour nap and I never nap. And it's your body going, yeah, that's not necessarily a good thing. You need to relax more often so we don't have to shut you down every now and then on our own kind of thing. So it was good to relax, but I don't think we take the time, especially in our spiritual lives, to just relax and take time to just reflect. And so this month we're going to talk about reflecting. Now, this is all kind of ironic because today's topic doesn't sound like reflecting, but it is. It's kind of an active reflecting. So if you've been here for a while, you know I love wrestling. Wrestling is, I wrestled in high school, and I've done some coaching, I've done some reffing and things like that. My in-laws actually, they watched the messages, and they heard Jay teasing me about how much I mentioned Penn State wrestling. And so for Christmas, they bought me a Penn State wrestling shirt, which is, yeah, I know. Some of you just don't understand greatness when you see it. But the great thing is my mother-in-law, she took it out of the packaging. She's like, it's crooked. The logo's crooked. So they call and they're like, oh, the one you sent, it's crooked. You need to send us another one. They're like, oh, okay. So they sent another one. And so now I have not one, but 2 Penn State wrestling shirts. And I was so tempted to wear one today, but I just couldn't get myself to do it. But the great thing is, as I hold up the shirts, I'm like, I don't know how you were holding that, but I don't think it's crooked at all. So I have 2 great Penn State wrestling shirts that one may eventually make its way up on stage sometime. But while I was coaching, from time to time, you would have a wrestler get injured because wrestling is a rather rough sport. It's pretty physical. It's rather hard to wrestle without getting physical. In fact, it's called stalling, and you get kicked out and you lose that way. So from time to time, a wrestler will get injured. And so during practice, until they get medically cleared, all they can do is watch, right? And we've had wrestlers who are like, Coach, all I can do is watch. Can't I just go home and do homework? We're like, no, you're going to stay in the wrestling room. You're going to pay attention. You're going to watch. Even during practice, you're going to watch the drills. You need to be focusing. You need to be trying to learn. Even if you can't participate, at least try to get what you can from practice. Actually see what's happening, hear what's happening, run the scenarios through your mind and things like that. Stay focused, stay engaged. And besides that, if you're here, we know you're not home eating like a half gallon of ice cream and getting out of your weight class, right? But we also know that sitting against the wall at practice is nowhere close to as effective as if he was on the mat actually wrestling. Because you can stand along the wall and you can watch and you can listen and you can try to stay focused, but until you're actually wrestling, some things just don't make sense. But once you get on the mat and you start wrestling and you listen to your coaches who have all wisdom and knowledge and all that, right? When you finally listen to the coach and you try something the coach has been teaching you and it works, and you're like, oh, now I understand. But you have to get on the mat and wrestle. It's not good enough. Imagine if a wrestling team's idea was, look, if they practice every day, there's a chance someone might get hurt. So to keep everybody healthy and away from injury, we're just going to line everybody along the wall, and we're going to have the coaches in the middle, and they're going to demonstrate all the different moves, and they're going to do all the wrestling. But the actual wrestlers, we're just going to have them line the wall and watch until the day of a match. And then the first time they ever actually wrestle is the day of a match. That would not go well. How often do we do that spiritually? How often do we spiritually sit along the wall and we listen and we watch and we think it's good enough, rather than actually getting in and wrestling? And here's one step further. Today, I want to ask the question of, when is the last time you wrestled with God? When is the last time you actually wrestled with God? Now, some of you may be thinking, God and I had it out this morning. And I am currently still wrestling with God. And there may be all sorts of ways and different scenarios that we have of why we wrestle with God and how we wrestle with God. But I want to take a look at a passage of Scripture, and this is what part of what Steve Deneff was speaking on, was found in Genesis chapter 32, verses 22 through 30. And this is when Jacob wrestles with God. And we're not going to do a deep dive into these verses, but I want us to just listen to the imagery of this. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants and his 11 sons and crossed the ford of the Jabbok, that's a river. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So everything's on the other side. So Jacob was left all alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Now, this is interesting. It's like Jacob was left all alone, and all of a sudden, now this guy's wrestling. Like, if this was a movie, we would be like, where did this come from? Did they, like, clip out a scene? What happened? But so he was left all alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that the hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." And Israel, the most likely definition of that is wrestled with God. And you have overcome. Jacob said, "Please tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask me my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." So here is the story of Jacob wrestling with God. Now, I don't want to dive too deep into the actual story and to pick it apart and come up with points from that. I just want to say, look, here is an account of someone wrestling with God. Now, this is saying it was even a physical encounter, right? Jacob actually wrestling with God. And God saying, "Look, you need to let me go. Daybreak's coming." And Jacob saying, "No way. I'm not letting you go until you bless me." And so God does bless him. So when is the last time you wrestled with God? That's the point I want to really stick with. And that is the point. And to be honest, this is what I just felt God truly saying, ask, when's the last time you wrestled? When's the last time that people at Hillside have wrestled with me? And there's all sorts of reasons to wrestle with God. When I found myself in a position where I was let go from a church in the middle of COVID because of finances, in the middle of COVID, when churches are trying to figure out how to do ministry, and they're watching their numbers dwindle, and no one's hiring, everyone's doing basically what Green Bay was doing. Hey, we're going to have to let some people go. When I found myself in that situation where, God, you called me to ministry. You called me for this job. And now I don't have this ministry job. And I'm in a situation where there's not a whole lot of people out there hiring right now. I wrestled with God. How, God? How does this work? Help me understand why you called me to this, and now I find myself without a job, and I don't know where to turn. I don't know how we're going to be paying bills. You know, I just had all these questions, and I had quite the wrestling match with God. Backtrack a little bit more. Haley's around 2 years old. She's having an extreme anaphylactic reaction to peanuts. She's coughing. I just knew it wasn't right. Long story short, find her in her bedroom. Her lips are already turning blue. Fortunately, we already had an EpiPen. I hit her with the EpiPen. Amy's calling 911. I'm in an ambulance riding with my little girl. And I'm going, God, why are you allowing this to happen to her? And I'll tell you, I would like to say I was just an amazing pastor and just praising God all the way to the hospital. Or I wish I could even say I was a pastor who was playing with God, saying, please, God, save my girl. Please, please. No, I was a pastor who was saying, you better save my girl. I was angry. I was wrestling with God. Another time I wrestled was when we were making a transition from one church to another, and we didn't know what B was. We knew we were leaving A, didn't know where B was. It was over Christmas break, and so we were, I was online looking for different positions and things like that, and it was just kind of, again, one of those, where are we going, God? Would love some guidance, and that was fine. But we were at our in-laws for Christmas, and then we got home to find our house was broken into while we were gone. Side door was still ajar. We got into the house. The bedrooms were ransacked. I was just like, seriously, God? Seriously, this is life right now? There are other times where my wrestling with God is when someone comes up to me, because I'm the pastor, and the pastor is supposed to know all and every theological answer to every theological question that there may be out there. And they ask me a really great question, and I look at them and go, that's a really great question. I'm going to have to go and work this out. Or what's really fun is when someone comes up to you and says, hey, I know, maybe we should stop the recording right now. I know what the Wesleyan stance is on XYZ. But as I study the Bible, I see this view. Might be a little bit more biblical. And then I have to wrestle with my heritage and my tradition. And I have to wrestle with God and say, God, okay, what is the truth? Because you know what? I would rather stand for God's truth than the Wesleyan discipline. And sometimes there's a wrestling match. When's the last time you've wrestled with God? Why haven't you wrestled with God recently? See, most of the situations I just shared, we could all pretty much relate to in one way or another. Of course, when something bad starts to happen or we're confused, we don't understand, and we think our path should be going one way, and all of a sudden it's taken a right or left turn, we can look at it and go, okay, God, why is this happening to me? What's happening? And we can understand that wrestling. But here's the real question I want to ask is, when is the last time you wrestled with God for the express purpose of simply spiritual growth? We had another guy on our wrestling team when I was coaching varsity who thought he was good enough. You try to push him. He's like, Coach, I got it. Next week it's going to be a breeze. I know who I'm wrestling. I beat him 3 times already, la, la, la. And he thought he was good enough. And you know what? He was good enough. But he could have been better. But he was satisfied with where he was. This is good enough. Are you finding yourself spiritually good enough to the point where you think, I really don't have to confront any confrontational or controversial issues. I don't have to take a deeper dive into the Bible, or, you know what? I can leave my question as, I don't know. When's the last time you had a spiritual question that maybe you were asking or someone else asked that at first kind of ruffled your feathers a little bit and made you be like, oh, man, I'm not sure about that. It makes me uncomfortable. I'm not sure where God lands or how to respond or how to react. But you just go, you know what? No, I'm good enough right now. So I don't want to dive in any deeper. It's kind of like having some kind of ailment that continues to bother you, but you refuse to go to the doctor because you're like, you know what? Nah, I've learned to deal with it. I've learned to put up with it. There's no sense of going to the doctor. Part of it is because you're afraid if you go to the doctor might say something you don't want to hear. And for some reason, as humans, we think if the doctor doesn't say it, then it doesn't become reality, right? But if you go to the doctor, there's also a chance that the doctor is going to go, oh, man, I wish you would have came in like when this first started happening because we can take care of it like that, and you wouldn't have had to have been dealing with it for all this time. We need to, as a congregation, I believe, on a semi-regular basis, be finding ourselves in a wrestling match with God. Not in a negative way, but in a way that says, I want to continue to grow. And I don't believe that just because I've been listening to pastors and podcasts and reading books and listening to Christian music and donating to K-Love whenever they ask and, all those things. I don't believe just because I've had all this human influence in my life that I'm good enough. I need to have some one-on-one conversations and experiences with God. And I need to be able to ask God tough questions. And I need God to be able to answer and give me some peace, some joy, some patience, but also, you know what? Sometimes I need God to give me the straight, hard truths as well. I've joked about it before, but when I first started attending Indiana Wesleyan University, if you wanted to play euchre, wonderful card game, but if you wanted to play euchre, you had to find yourself a deck of cards that did not have the Jack, King, and Queen. Like I said, you could go to the wonderful, righteous, holy characters of Bart Simpson, Marge Simpson, and Homer Simpson, and they were fine with that. You could play those cards, right? But now you go to Indiana Wesleyan and you said, hey, you're not allowed to play with regular playing cards. People be like, what are you talking about? In fact, at this retreat, I ran into a pastor friend of mine, and he was talking to his wife. He goes, oh, yeah. So Dave's the one that at district camp, I had him come speak to the youth, and the DS at the time came walking through the cafeteria, the snack bar area where we were, and we were playing cards. And the DS came walking through, he goes, oh, guys playing cards, huh? And without thinking, he's like, yeah, you want in? And the DS is like, no. And after he left, he's like, oh, I'm like, yeah, I think he's a little upset that we're playing cards at district camp. And, but now, come on, we understand that's not an issue. But here is this tradition, and I understand where that tradition came from and all that, but somewhere along the way, we've discovered maybe God's really not concerned about those playing cards. But I'll tell you what, there were some wrestling matches. Believe it or not, folks, there were wrestling matches to get to that point. To get to the understanding of, okay, maybe that's not a big deal. Another one. There was a time when churches would say, you know what? Interracial marriage is completely wrong. And they wouldn't marry someone that was an interracial marriage. And now we may look at that and go, what? Yeah, in my lifetime, okay? And, okay, for some of you, you realize this. For some of you, this statement might be totally confusing. I'm not that old, right? So in my lifetime, I heard those debates. But there were some wrestling matches that needed to take place to get us to the understanding of what's human knowledge and wisdom and rules and what is really godly. Okay, get ready. Hold on. Still today, the church, and I'm not saying us, I'm saying big global church. There is a large segment of the large global church that when it comes to those who are in the LBGQT, whatever letter community, those in that community, there is not love from the church to those people. In fact, it's those people. There's some wrestling matches going on, folks. Now, I am not standing up here and saying I agree with the lifestyle. But I'll tell you what, I also am not agreeing with how the church has responded either. There's some wrestling matches. And right now, some of you may be even thinking, we called him to be our pastor? Man, after 9/11, if you were a Muslim, were you being extended love? There were some wrestling matches. Now, I'm giving some extremes. But what areas in your life do maybe you need to step back and say, hey, God, I want to step into this and I want to have a wrestling match with you. I don't want to have a wrestling match with my favorite author. I don't want to have a wrestling match with my favorite podcaster. I don't want to hear from them necessarily, their views and their ideas on a particular topic. God, I want to have a wrestling match with you. I need you to share with me what your truth is, how you view XYZ, whatever it is, whatever the topic. God, I need to hear from you. I am so desperate to hear from you. I want to grow closer to you. I want to become more and more like you. I want people to truly be able to see you more than they see me. And so I'm going to be like Jacob. I'm not going to let go until you help me understand this issue completely, how you see this issue, not how others see this issue, not how my traditions have seen this issue, but you, God. I want your truth and nothing else. And I'm not going to let go of the struggle, and I'm not going to let go of talking and wrestling with you until I get that answer. When's the last time you've wrestled with God? You know, the interesting thing about wrestling as a sport is it's scheduled, right? A wrestling match doesn't just break out spontaneously, right? That's called a fight, okay? So what happens is the schools get together, they schedule, hey, this is what time we're gonna meet, right? And we pair each other up in the weight classes and all that and do all the weird psycho stuff that we do before we go out on the mat to try to psych out the other team and whatnot. But it's a scheduled time. And you know, okay, at this time, when I was wrestling, this dates me a little bit. I knew when I was wrestling, I wrestled 119 when that was still a weight class. And at that time I knew, okay, I was fourth in line. I was going to be the fourth match of the night until they switched the weight classes around. Then I was 121 and they got rid of 98 because apparently we didn't have any really small people anymore. And then all of a sudden I became the number 3 match of the night. I knew when that was going to happen. It was planned, it was scheduled. And so I could prepare, right? And when I was in high school, the guys ended up, you get to know your other wrestlers. Some guys, they want distracted all the way up to their match. They want someone talking to them, talk to me. Otherwise, they just get totally like stage fright and they freak out and they can't move. I was totally opposite. I was like, do not talk to me or you might get punched. I'm just like, because this sounds weird, but my wrestling coach is like, Dave, I know you're a pastor's kid. And I know you're a Christian. I love you. That's great. Could you please be mean on the wrestling mat? Like, because like early on, like after a match, like if I did a move that I knew was going to be a little painful or whatever, afterwards I'd be like, oh man, I'm sorry. He's like, stop it, right? He's like, just pretend like, the guy out there just ran your mom over with a car and laughed about her or something. Be mean, right? So I'm back there trying to get mean, which it's kind of a funny thing. So I'm like, leave me alone, leave me alone. But I knew when this wrestling match was going to happen. When's the last time you scheduled a wrestling match with God? Or when's the last time you actually scheduled a time where it was going to be just you and God? Because, see, that's another thing I love about wrestling. It's a team sport, but it's an individual sport. When you get out on the mat, it is you and your competitor. There's no tag team in real wrestling. Like, oh, I'm tired, here, you come in and you pretend to wrestle this guy for a while, right? It is you out there with whoever you're wrestling. There's no true timeouts. If we're going to truly take some time to reflect on who God is, and we're truly going to take time to reflect on how God wants to work in our lives, if we're going to have that one-on-one time with God, we're going to have to schedule it. Because remember, we started off talking about, man, especially in our culture, we don't do free time well. We pack our schedules. I'd say next step, wherever you are, maybe right now you currently have a set time set aside for prayer and Bible reading. That's awesome. And maybe that's a daily time that you've got marked out. Maybe you don't. And maybe your time with God is in the car while you listen to Christian radio or on Sunday mornings here. If you're not scheduling a regular time of prayer and reading your Bible, I'd encourage you to take that first step. I'm just saying, you know what? Man, maybe your first step is once a week. And for those of you who have a regular schedule, I would say, are you having a wrestling match with God? Or are you doing takedown drills with the takedown dummy? And what I mean by that, a lot of wrestling rooms you may see, they have this weird looking guy that's like just suspended against the wall like this. And you just do drills. You're just practicing your shots. You're practicing either double leg, single leg, side crotch, whatever it is you want to work on, right? And you're just drilling time after time after time. And you're trying to perfect your shot. But it's not a real person. It's just you. And you're not really wrestling, you're just going through the motions. How many of us during our prayer time and Bible reading, we're just going through the motions? Yeah, we're reading and we're praying, but we're not expecting God to actually be there. We're just doing our religious duty. I would say schedule a time and expect God to be there with you. And when you're reading the Bible, you're just like, okay, God, what is it that you are wanting to say to me today? And picture God sitting there reading along with you. And when you pray, man, I don't know when we started this whole hey, I'm sending you positive thoughts. When did that start? But boy, I tell you what, I think church people, we stepped into the positive thoughts pretty deep. We call it prayer, but how many times have you prayed and you didn't really intend to be speaking directly to the creator of all? You were just kind of letting your thoughts go. You were just kind of casting it out to the universe or whatever, instead of actually picturing that God is sitting there with you, actually listening to your prayers and paying attention and hearing every word you say and taking them to heart. When's the last time you've wrestled with God? I was in a time in my walk that I was just like, ugh. I felt fake. I'd get up and I'd talk to teens, and afterwards, I'd go home. I'm like, ugh, I'm such a hypocrite. And so I called up one of my coaches, and not wrestling coaches, but mentor coaches, and just said, hey, can we get together? Can we talk? And so we got together, and I just let it out. And he said, when's the last time you sat with God? I'm like, but what do you mean? He goes, when's the last time you had time alone with God? And I said, well, I got my schedule. No. I'm not asking when did you do your devotions? When did you pray? He said, I don't care about any of that. I don't care about any of the fluff. I don't care about any of the routine. I don't care about any of that. When's the last time you spent time with God? And you expected God to be there. You anticipated God to be there. And you knew God was going to be there. I said, it's been a long time. Gave me a great idea. Said, Proverbs. Said, every day, read a proverb. Start Proverb 1. Next day, it's 2. Next day, it's 3. And do that until you get through Proverbs. And he said, and schedule the time. It's the same time every day. Don't vary it. Make sure it's a time that you know you can commit to. Don't squeeze it in between things. Make sure it's actual time that you can get to. He said, read the proverb, pray, and sit and listen. He said, you know what's going to happen? I'm like, what? Like some days, nothing. He goes, some days you're going to read the Proverbs, you're going to pray, and you're going to sit there, and you're going to listen, and you're going to listen. And then you're going to go. He said, other days you're going to start reading the proverb, and God is going to speak to you, and you're going to be like, oh my goodness. I can feel God's presence right here with me. And it's as if he's whispering this proverb in my ear directly to me. He said, now here's the hard challenge. He said, Proverb 1 on day 1, Proverb 2 on day 2, Proverb 3 on day 3, so on and so forth. He said, you skip a day. He said, you miss a day. Guess what? You're back at Proverb 1 until you get through the Proverbs. He said, but you have to expect that this is going to be a time that you are sitting with God. He said, God doesn't have to speak when he's there. Just because you haven't heard from him doesn't mean God isn't there. He said, have you ever sat with your mom and your dad and you were just sitting there with no conversation? I'm like, yeah. Why can't we do the same with God? And just enjoy his presence, knowing he's there. When's the last time you've wrestled with God? When's the last time it's been you and truly God interacting? And sometimes it may be as much as what Jacob was doing, of just grabbing a hold and saying, God, I need this answer. I'm desperate. I am in desperate times, and I need to hear from you, and I'm not letting go until I hear from you. And other times it might be simply, God, I just want to be with you. I just want to hear from you. I just want to grow closer to you. I want to become more and more like you so that, God, people will see you through me. That people would get a true glimpse of what it means to be a Christ follower. That people would get a true glimpse of your character because they can see it being reflected off of my life. You can choose to sit on the wall of the practice room. You can choose to say, hey, I'm part of this team called Christianity. You could even come to all the practices, aka service. You can put on the uniform, whatever that looks like. You can talk the language. But have you actually got on the mat? Are you humble enough to say, God, I need to wrestle with you? Because for some of us, it's a pride thing. Nah, I don't need God. I got it all together. This whole God thing's kind of weird, and I don't buy it. I would encourage you, take a little humbleness upon yourself and just try out God. Are you brave enough? Some of you have been Christ followers for a while, and you are set in your ways because you know what the Bible has to say. You know the truth. You've memorized the Wesleyan Discipline. Oh, please, no. If you've done that, come up for prayer. We'll pray for you because there's got to be something better to do in life. But maybe you need the courage to say, God, what areas do I have it wrong? Because I want to have it right, and I want it to be your right. When's the last time you wrestled with God? Let's go ahead and pray. God, just thank you for today. And God, I thank you. I thank you that when we do choose to wrestle with you, looking at the account with your wrestling match with Jacob, God, I mean, seriously, us in your presence, there's just no match. But your mercy and your love causes you to wrestle with us with a gentleness. Because your ultimate desire, God, is reconciliation of a relationship. God, thank you for being that God. And God, I pray that all of us would have those wrestling matches with you on a regular basis. God, some of them just maybe lighter matches and almost fun of just learning new things from you. Other times, God, desperation of clinging so tightly to you and onto you and begging and pleading for those answers to questions. And God, really, when it boils down, maybe all we're saying is, God, please, again, show me you're real. Show me your love. I need you. Thank you for being willing to wrestle with us. In your name we pray. Amen.